Hey all, this is Mr. T. Just wanted to do a video for you. I did a Zoom chat room just the other day for quite a few families on the history of this COVID-19 and how it kind of has come to be where it's at right now. And so I wanted to give you a timeline, as you will, with some news stories, some headlines that have happened over the last couple weeks and even couple months to help you better understand how we got to where we're at right now. And so if you'll follow along this timeline, I think you'll have a little bit better idea of how we got to where things are. And so lots of areas where I'm getting my information. Some of them are CDC headlines, some are news sources like CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, BBC, a whole host of other things. And so follow along with the timeline. I'm going to go all the way back to the middle of November, and that's where we're going to start all the way to present. Today is March 19th, and I'll kind of let you know where we're at and where we're started. So the earliest that I can find for anything in terms of COVID-19 would be all the way back to November 17th, 2019. It looks like the original case of and I'm going to refer to it either as the novel coronavirus or COVID-19. News media right now, you hear a lot as COVID-19. I like to call it the novel coronavirus, primarily because it helps describe what it is. Novel meaning new, corona, crown-shaped virus germ. So the new crown-shaped germ, and that's why I like the novel coronavirus to describe it. But you'll see people call it COVID-19 in the media as well. So November 19th, original case of the novel coronavirus emerged in 2019, according to the official Chinese government sources. But at that time, it was not recognized. And this is after the fact. So this is kind of looking back there. Fast forward all the way to December 1st. That first known patient started experiencing symptoms on December 1st, 2019. Okay, first time anybody's experiencing symptoms. The time between the 8th and the 18th of December, there are 7 cases that were later diagnosed with this novel coronavirus that they have been documented. 2 of them are linked to the seafood or wild market. 5 of those were not at that time. Let's go to the 12th of December. The Chinese state broadcast CCTV reported, and this was aired in January 12th, 2020, that the new viral outbreak was first detected in the city of Wuhan, China, on the 12th of December, 2019. So again, that's a news story that happened on the 12th of January that said the virus was first detected in a city on the 12th of December. And so that's, we're using that as a timeline to say on the 12th of December, there is this viral outbreak going on in the city of Wuhan in China. 21st of December, the Chinese epidemiologist it's their version of the CDC, the United States, for the Center of Disease Control. Their version is the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, published an article. This again is after the fact. They published an article on the 20th of January. They stated that the first cluster of patients with pneumonia of an unknown cause had been identified on December 21st, 2019. So December 21st, at that time, they had a cluster of patients with pneumonia of an unknown cause. Okay, December 24th, first publicly reported collection of virus samples from patients. And the reason why they were doing that was for genetic sequencing. They wanted to determine what this virus is, what is it made up of, and so they collected those samples for genetic sequencing. All right, December 25th, a report of medical staff in 2 hospitals in Wuhan suspected to be infected, and they were isolated around December 25th. So these patients, they want to isolate them in the hospital because there's this unknown infection, this unknown pneumonia, all of these negative things that are going on. So that was December 25th. December 26th, a laboratory identified the coronavirus from a sample collected on the 24th, and they said it's most closely related to the SARS-like coronavirus. So in looking at that, They look through their, Rolodex or their virtual binder book to see if there's anything else that's similar to what they have, and they said, okay, this looks most closely to a bat type SARS coronavirus, and that was their best comparison that they could find. All right, so the 1st of January, so it's a new year. According to the Chinese state-sponsored Shuhan News, that seafood market, Henan Seafood Market, was closed January 1st. And the reason they stated this market was closed was for regulations because they were closing. However, there's a later report at the end of January 24th that states that the seafood market had been closed on the 1st for cleaning and disinfecting. And so we know that January 1st it was closed down. There's conflicting reports of the reason why that this wild, I like to call it an exotic seafood market was closed. So, I'm from here in the United States. When I say wildlife, people probably think of, deer or bison or antelope or bear. I like to use the term exotic because any animal that you could think of, would be in an open air market that would be butchered on site for consumers to then eat. And so think of that for kind of this exotic market. It's not like a seafood market where you can buy different types of seafood here in the United States. Think of it more like a open market where they're butchering multiple types of animals for customers to have. And that seafood market on the 1st was closed down. Okay. January 2nd, there's 41 people that are admitted to hospitals in Wuhan. They're confirmed to have contracted, at least laboratory confirmed, the novel coronavirus. 27, so 66% of the patients had direct exposure to this Henan seafood wholesale market. So think this exotic seafood market. All 41 patients were subsequently relocated from the hospital that they had originally been diagnosed in. So they are trying to collect all these patients together, isolate them in a different location, and take them so they're not in these various hospitals. Okay, on the 3rd of January, scientists at the National Institute of Viral Disease Control and Prevention determined the genetic sequence of this novel coronavirus from specimens that they had collected from patients in Wuhan, China. And there was 3 distinct strains at that time that were established. So big news, 2nd of January, they get the genetic sequencing completed for that, and then that gets shared in the medical community. So big, huge breakthrough right there. Let's go to January 11th, 2020. China reports its first case that of a person had the novel coronavirus that actually died. So this is the first time that a patient actually dies because of the novel coronavirus. The state media in China, as you know, China is a communist country, and so the state media reported the first death was a 61-year-old male who had visited that live animal, that seafood market, that exotic market, whatever you want to call it, in Wuhan. All the way to January 21st, we have the very first case in the United States. A man in his 30s from Washington State. He had traveled to Wuhan. He's diagnosed with the novel coronavirus. Japan, South Korea, Thailand are also reporting their first cases one day prior. That's January 21st. January 23rd, China imposes a strict lockdown of the city. Think of this city, approximately 11 million people in this city of Wuhan. In terms of this province that this city and other cities are in, roughly a comparison would be a state, but that's not a true representation. So this district, this province area is called Hubei. Hubei has a population of approximately 55 million people. So this city is Wuhan goes into lockdown. China imposes aggressive containment measures in the city, essentially the epicenter of the outbreak. They're suspending flights, trains. They shut down the subways, buses, ferries in an attempt to stem the spread of the virus. One thing that I will say with that, so they issued that order early in the morning, and before they're able to actually completely lock down the city. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people are able to relocate out of that city, travel before a true travel ban goes in. And so you have the spread of hundreds of thousands of people outside this city into this province and other parts of China as well. So that's when they attempt to lock it down in that city. But you can tell that the virus has spread to other countries by that time as well. Okay, so January 30th, the end of January, WHO. So the WHO stands for the World Health Organization. They declare the novel coronavirus a global health emergency. For the sixth time in history, the WHO declares a public health emergency of international concern. It's a designation reserved for extraordinary events that threaten the spread of the globe. January 31st, this is specific to the United States. President Donald Trump, he restricts travel from China to the United States. They said they would suspend entry into the United States by any foreign nationals who had traveled to China in the past 14 days, excluding immediate family members of American citizens or permanent residents. By this date, 213 people had died, and there's nearly 10,000 that had been infected worldwide. Okay, February 2nd. February 2nd is the first coronavirus death that's reported outside of China. It's a 44-year-old man in the Philippines. He died after being infected, officials say. The first death reported outside of China. By this time, worldwide, there's about 360 people that have died. February 5th, so we're going to start to get into the cruise ship. That's where they kind of are in mainstream media quite heavily. So it's the first one's called the Diamond Princess. It's a cruise ship that was quarantined February 5th. So after a 2-week trip in Southeast Asia, there's more than 3,600 passengers as well as staff members. They began a quarantine aboard the Diamond Princess cruise ship in Yokohama, Japan. Officials started screening passengers, and the number of people who test positive became the largest number of coronavirus cases outside of China. By February 13th, that number stood at 218, and as the date goes on, more and more cases. And then many of those cases are then screened, and then the citizen of whatever country it is, most often they were sent to that country for screening, quarantine, testing, medical attention if needed. All right, February 7th, a Chinese doctor who had tried to raise the alarm died. This was a pretty controversial thing in the news. So Dr. Li, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce the last name. Most often I've seen it referred to as Dr. Li. Dr. Li Wenling, he's a Chinese doctor. He actually ends up dying February 7th from contracting the novel coronavirus. He was hailed as a hero by many people for trying to raise alarms early on that a cluster of infections is going to spin out of control. So early in January, authorities and the Chinese government had reprimanded him. He was forced to sign a statement denouncing his warning as unfounded and an illegal rumor. His death provoked anger and frustration at how the Chinese government mishandled the situation by not sharing information earlier and silencing whistleblowers. So that was in the news media quite often. A Chinese doctor early on via social media shared, hey, I'm really concerned about these cluster of patients I'm seeing. This is something that is new. He's trying to sound the alarm. He ends up actually dying because of the novel coronavirus. All right, February 11th, the coronavirus is renamed COVID-19. Prior to this time, most often in the media, I heard it referred to as the Wuhan coronavirus. The Wuhan virus, most often the name of the city, Wuhan, was attached with the name of that. And so the World Health Organization, they announced the novel coronavirus, the formal new name as COVID-19. So COVID-19 stands for for coronavirus, vid for virus, D for disease, COVID-19. 19 in terms of when this case first came on the scene. Health officials purposely avoid naming COVID-19 after any geographical location after an animal, group of people, as not to stigmatize people or places. And so since then, you've seen it referred most often as COVID-19, but also sometimes as the novel coronavirus. By the next day after that, the death toll in China is a little bit over 1,100. Total number of confirmed cases rose to over 44,000. There's, at that point, almost 400 cases outside of China in 24 countries. And so you're seeing a pretty decent spread going on at that point. February 13th, there are more than 14,000 new cases in this province that I'm talking about, Hubei. So you've got Wuhan, which is this large city. Then you have the province called Hubei. Officials added more than 14,800 new cases to the total number of cases infected in the Hubei province. And the ruling Communist Party, they're ousted by top officials there. New cases set a daily record coming after officials in Hubei seemed to be including infections that were diagnosed by using lung scans of asymptomatic patients. So the spike was a result of a change in the threshold of a positive diagnosis. So you see your curve going up slowly, upticking like this, and then you see a sharp spike. The reason why there was that massive sharp spike was because they changed the way that they were classifying a positive diagnosis of COVID-19, and that was, as of today, that is the largest one-day case count to that. So they had more than 14,800 patients diagnosed in one day in this province for COVID-19. February 19th, hundreds leave the quarantine ship. All right, so as we were talking about earlier with the Diamond Princess, after a 2-week quarantine, 443 passengers began leaving the Diamond Princess cruise ship. It was a 3-day operation to take people off of that who tested negative for the virus and did not have symptoms. Passengers who shared cabins with infected patients remained on the ship. A total of 612 people aboard the ship at that time were infected. February 21st, a secretive church is linked to an outbreak in South Korea. So this kind of headline news of how this virus spread in South Korea. And so you saw quite a few headline stories about this. February 21st. So it's a Church of Jesus. I'm not 100% sure. I think it was spoken in the media, but Sinchunjin Church of Jesus, it's a secretive church in South Korea, was linked to a surge of infections in that country. The number of confirmed cases in the country rose to 200. More than 400 other church members reported potential symptoms, health officials say. As a result, the government shut down thousands of kindergartens, nursing homes, community centers, and put a stop to political rallies in the capital. All right, so that's where you start to see the virus take off in South Korea. Let's talk a little bit about February 21st. Soon after that, a virus appears in Iran from an unknown source. So that's the first time we see mention of that in Iran. So February 19th, they announced 2 cases in the country. Then hours later say that both of those patients die. It was kind of unusual. 2 days later, on the 21st, they announced 2 additional deaths. The source of the virus in Iran is unknown. By the 20th, the number of global cases had risen to nearly 76,000, according to the World Health Organizations. So, in all actuality, it probably got there before the 19th. Iran, when they were announcing it, they would announce some patients had it. They immediately died. And so you'll see that's the start of Iran and the numbers up there from that. February 23rd, Italy sees a major surge in the novel coronaviruses, and officials try to lock down various towns. Europe faces its first major outbreak as the number of reported cases in Italy grow from fewer than 5 to more than 150 in a very short time. In the Lombardy region, officials locked down 10 towns after a cluster of cases suddenly emerged in Condego, southwest of Milan. As a result, schools closed and sporting and cultural events are canceled. And so now you're seeing the spread across Italy as well. February 24th, here in the United States, President Trump, he asked Congress for a $1.25 billion coronavirus response. As the number of coronavirus cases around the globe continue to decline, the Trump administration began preparing for the virus to arrive in the United States. The White House asked Congress to allocate $1.25 billion in new emergency funds to bolster its preparedness, a significant escalation in the administration's response. At that point, the United States, where CDC officials warned of an almost certain outbreak, there's 35 confirmed cases at that time. There's no deaths. February 26th, the first case of a suspected local transmission in the United States. So I'm going to talk a little bit about local transmission. Prior to that, the transmission was from somebody who maybe lived in Seattle, had traveled to Wuhan, came back, and that's how they think. Local transmission is somebody who lives in, let's say, Texas, picked it up from somebody locally there. Okay, so February 26th, first local transmission, United States. Center of CDC confirms first case of the novel coronavirus in a patient in California. No travel history to an outbreak area. No contact with anyone diagnosed with the virus. It's suspected to be the first instance of local transmission here in the United States. That is in the state of California. California is in one of the big three at this time for the United States. Washington, Oregon, New York soon report their own cases of possible community transmission. So as we follow, Washington, Oregon, New York, California are all going to be the hot spots at this point. One, because of population, but two, because they were the first ones to have cases. February 29th, first death reported in the United States. First coronavirus COVID-19 death is reported in Washington State after a man with no travel history to China dies on February 28th at Evergreen Health Medical Center in Kirkland, Washington. So that's announced the next day. Two deaths that occurred February 26th earlier on at a nearby nursing home. They would later be recorded as COVID-19 deaths to occur in the United States. As the number of cases globally rose to about 87,000, the Trump administration issues its highest level warning known as do not travel for areas in Italy, South Korea, most affected by the virus. The government also banned all travel to Iran and barred entry to any foreign citizens who had visited Iran in the previous 14 days. That takes us to March. U.S. officials approve widespread coronavirus testing. CDC lifts all federal restrictions on testing for the coronavirus on March 3rd, according to VP Mike Pence. The news came after CDC's first attempt to produce a diagnostic kit kind of falls flat. At that point, the novel coronavirus had infected more than 90,000 around the globe and killed about 30,000 according to the WHO. One caveat with that is that's not... That doesn't mean anybody who wants to be tested could be testing. You would still have to go through a host of procedures to be screened in order to get that test. So you'd be considered low, moderate, high risk. In order to get a test, you'd have to be considered high risk at that point. To be able to get a high risk diagnosis, you would have to either had traveled outside the United States in the last 14 days. You would have to had underlying health concerns, elderly, something like that, had direct contact with a patient positively identified with COVID. So there's some structure around that. Not everybody could get the case. They wanted to make it widely available. And as you see in the news, past that, there's many times where people were frustrated that wanted to get tested, but they did not meet certain criteria, so they were not able to get tested. Okay? March 11th, President Trump here in the United States blocks most visitors from the continental European countries. Not all of them. Prime Minister, in a primetime address from the Oval Office, President Trump said he would halt travelers from European countries other than Britain for 30 days as the WHO declares the coronavirus a pandemic. Stock markets continue to plunge. Pretty much throughout this, there's times where they went back up, but for the most part, a very downward trend. March 13th, Trump declares a national emergency. President Trump officially declared a national emergency, said he's making $50 billion in federal funds available to states and territories to combat the coronavirus. He said he would give hospitals and doctors more flexibility to respond to the virus, including making it easier to treat people remotely. March 14th, President Trump declares the following day a national day of prayer. President Trump proclaims March 15th National Day of Prayer for all Americans affected by the coronavirus pandemic and for the national response efforts. He urges all Americans of all faiths and all religions and all backgrounds to offer prayers for those affected, including people who have suffered harm or loss of loved ones. March 15th, CDC warns against large gatherings. So CDC warns people against holding or attending gatherings larger than 50 people. This includes conferences, festivals, parades, concerts, sporting events, weddings for not up to 4 to 8 weeks, recommending that individuals cancel or postpone those events to avoid spreading the virus or introducing it to new communities. Okay, March 16th, CDC and White House issue 15 days to slow the spread. So this is quickly on the heels of their other recommendation. This one ratchets it down from 50. They recommend no gatherings of greater than 10 people. So that was a very quick escalation from 50 to 10 people for the CDC recommendations. March 17th, France imposes a national lockdown. They prohibited gatherings of any size, postponing the second round of its municipal elections, one of Europe's most stringent up to this point for their lockdown. Residents try to stay home. Officials allow people to go out for fresh air, but warn that meeting a friend on the street or in the park would be punishable by a fine. By this time, France had more than 6,500 infections and more than 140 deaths, according to the WHO. Excuse me, March 19th. For the first time, China reports 0 local infections. So let me talk a little bit about that. They report no local infections for the previous day, a milestone in the ongoing fight for the pandemic. The news signaled an end to China's epidemic could be in sight. However, experts said the country would need to see at least 14 consecutive days without new infections for the outbreak to be considered over. And the announcement did not mean that China recorded any novel coronaviruses for the day. Officials said that there are 34 new cases that had been confirmed among people who had arrived in China from elsewhere. And so that's where we are at. It is still the 19th today. I think you will see a whole host of other countries that are locking down their borders, locking down cities here in the United States, travel restrictions, travel bans. Rates are continuing to go up. Headline news today, Italy, their death toll now surpassed that of China. China, their bell curve for cases went all the way up and then kind of slowed down. Italy right now is still continuing to uptick. They have not reached the top to come down, so I would anticipate whatever their total numbers are right now potentially could double. So that's very concerning. The United States is continuing to see its uptick as well as a lot of other countries. So we'll update you as more information becomes available. But that kind of gives you a brief or not so brief timeline of how we got to where we're at with the novel coronavirus COVID-19. So subscribe, like. Thanks for watching.